Afternoon showers, the high near 86. For tonight, mostly clear, a low around 60. Then sunshine tomorrow, high of 84. Mike Jackson, WSIC News.
Well, good Friday morning, everybody. This is Senator Vickie Sawyer, happily with you on a sunny day. Hopefully it stays that way because I need to get in the yard because I think my neighbors are getting ready to speak about me. But I'm so grateful to be here. We've had a wonderful week in Raleigh, and I am excited to introduce you guys again to Joe Stewart, who was holding on the other line. But when we do want to let you, if you're just now listening and you haven't heard Joe on the radio show before, he is just a wealth of knowledge. You know, his title is Government Affairs for Independent Insurance Agents of North Carolina, but he has a long history in politics in Raleigh, and he really does bring a down-the-road factual landscape about what North Carolina looks like by the numbers. And when we're in Raleigh and we're talking about statewide races and we're talking about gubernatorial candidates, and this week, we just had all of the top of the ticket of the presidential race in North Carolina. I wanted Joe to come in and talk about who and how is this going to work and what us North Carolinians look like by the numbers. So, Joe Stewart, thank you so much for calling into the show. You are one of my favored guests, and that's because everyone tells me to have Joe Stewart back on the show again every time you're on. So thank you for calling in today.
Well, Senator, thank you so much. Those are kind words. I'm not sure that my knowledge of North Carolina politics constitutes wealth, but it's probably just enough to buy the level of beans above the store brand. So I appreciate that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, you have been instrumental in putting together a talking series, I guess, and you call it the Thinker's Lunch. And I reached out to you after being a part of this most recent one that you had, and this is a lunch put together by you, but is well attended, and you had two very prominent strategists, both one Democrat and the other being a Republican, talking about this 2024 race and what does North Carolina look like, and will the candidates that we select in the primary represent that? So that's why I wanted to have you on the show to kind of discuss and digest all of that information that you had went through in that, because I think it's important to know, right? When we're here locally, we all have our friends and we talk to our, 10, 15, 20 friends or our congregation at church, and we all pretty much agree, this is the way it's going to be. But then when you start dissecting in North Carolina by the numbers, it really is eye-opening. So I appreciate your time today in talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely, Senator Sawyer. I'm always delighted to be on the show. And it is an interesting time in North Carolina politics, whether you are a Democrat or Republican, unaffiliated, conservative, or liberal. This is one of the most dynamic states in America in terms of our current political landscape. A lot of changes taking place as a result of the continued growth of the population, a surge in the urbanization of North Carolina as a result of that in-migration. We know the census data reveals that almost half of the total in-migration to North Carolina, half of the people moving to North Carolina from some other part of the country are moving either into the Wake County, Raleigh area or Mecklenburg, Charlotte area. So it's creating something we not historically had in North Carolina, great big cities. And cities have a very different political dynamic than the traditional North Carolina with its smaller cities. The Thinker's Lunch that you were talking about, Paul Shoemaker, longtime Republican political consultants, worked with a number of candidates at the state and local level. Morgan Jackson currently is the senior political advisor to Governor Cooper and is working with Josh Stein, the Attorney General, announced candidate for the Democratic primary for governor. And so the two of them actually are good friends, and they share a lot of common observations about this dynamic North Carolina political landscape. And the one thing that we came away from that Thinker's Lunch were both presented what they feel will be the key issues in the 2024 election. That most important is that constituency of unaffiliated registered voters. They've chosen not to designate themselves as either a Republican or Democrat in their voter registration. And those with a college degree or more, those become the most critical voters in the 2024 election because they are winnable by either the Democrat or Republican candidate. Mm-hmm. And we have no U.S. Senate race on the ballot in 2024, so governor is the race that everyone will be focused on in terms of the state election. And significantly, whomever the nominees are for the parties, whether it's Joe Biden and Donald Trump or two other people, that will have a significant impact down ballot in North Carolina because of the strong opinions that North Carolina voters have about those two individuals. Mm-hmm. And so what we will find undoubtedly is a lot of money will be spent in North Carolina in the presidential contest because both sides believe North Carolina is winnable for them. The Biden campaign already announcing that they consider North Carolina a battleground state. So we'll see a lot of TV ads here in North Carolina for the candidates for president. And undoubtedly, if things go according to at least how they seem now, Mark Robinson, the current lieutenant governor, will in all likelihood, be the Republican nominee for governor. If that's the way it looks right now, he's the front runner among those that have announced for that office. And Josh Stein, the attorney general, will probably be the Democratic nominee. The interesting thing is, Paul Shoemaker, who was at the Thinkers Lunch, had done a poll recently, showed still both of those individuals among very likely voters in the 2024 general election, still both of those individuals are relatively unknown. Yeah. In the poll that Paul did, 44% respondents had no idea who Mark Robinson was, 50% no idea who Josh Stein was. So still a lot of opportunity for those two candidates, should they end up being the party's nominee for the office of governor. Still a lot of definition of themselves, what they stand for, and what would be of interest to voters. A lot of that has to be built out and spent on advertisements and direct voter communications for both sides in this upcoming gubernatorial contest.
Yeah, you hit on several things that I want to kind of drill down on. But the first, let's go back to the numbers. Something that both of those men agreed on, and you highlighted in your Thinkers Lunch, is that the majority of voters who are coming to North Carolina are registering in Wake and Mecklenburg County. I mean, and although that we do have the rural areas, which were traditionally held by Democrats, turning more to the Republican registration side of it, is that going to be able to balance out the majority of these voters who are coming into the Wake and Mecklenburg and registering as either independents or that are leaning left, or who are just diehard Democrats? Talk about the population change in our rural versus urban areas.
Yeah, interestingly enough, even though North Carolina continues to grow at a pace of about 100 to 125,000 new residents every year, there's still a significant number of the counties, almost half of the 100 counties in North Carolina, are projected to either remain about the same size they are now or continue to lose population over the next decade or so. And so that uneven growth of the state will create a significantly different political landscape. But one of the things that we are aware of in American politics is that populational density is a good indicator of partisan identity of voters. And if the population in an area is 500 people or more per square mile, the likelihood that that part of the state would support a Democratic candidate for president is much greater. For example, Joe Biden, in the counties that Joe Biden won in the 2020 election in North Carolina, the average population density of those counties was almost at 500 people per square mile. Of the counties that Donald Trump won in North Carolina in the 2020 election, the average population density was about 150 people per square mile. And so there is that continued dynamic in the rural-urban divide of our politics. But as the urban areas become more concentrated, their Democratic performance becomes, in all likelihood, greater. And it's a question of, does at some point the crossover occur that there are simply more Democratic performance voters in the state than there are Republicans? Now, the other complicating factor in this is younger people and their partisan identity is very different than older generation American voters. We see this large cohort of unaffiliated registered voters, now the single largest category of registered voters in North Carolina, more than either Democrat or Republican, but not quite a majority of all registered voters yet. But still a significant contributing factor to that growth in unaffiliated voters is new voters, people that are turning 18 and becoming eligible to vote for the first time. In large part, that younger cohort just doesn't necessarily see themselves in the traditional partisan identities that older generation Americans have. And as a result, their sense of connection to candidates on a party basis is probably not as strong. They're also informed primarily through social media and communication with each other as a result of smartphones and the internet. And they don't watch the 6 o'clock news. They're not getting their information about candidates and issues in the same conventional way that American voters have historically. So a lot of complicating factors other than just the urban-rural divide in North Carolina. And we can talk about even the increasing diversity of our population. 3% of the registered voters now in North Carolina are Hispanic. There are a significant number of Hispanic North Carolinians that will come online, people that were born in North Carolina that will become North Carolina voters. That perhaps their mother and father were not here lawfully, but they were born in the United States in North Carolina. They will become a significant portion of the voting population in our state as well. A lot of complexity. I always say, if you want dynamic political life, you come to North Carolina. I mean, some states that are losing population remain the same relatively decade after decade. It must be boring to talk about their politics. North Carolina, it's always going to be exciting.
I agree. And the excitement is something that you hit on, and I try to remind myself often about, is that there are not a majority of the people who are registered to vote in North Carolina. There is not a majority Democrat or Republican. It is absolutely owned by unaffiliated voters. Now, like Paul Shoemaker will say, unaffiliated doesn't mean that they don't have an opinion, right? But it just means that Democrat nor Republican parties actually pulling towards them. And as a mother of a daughter who's in her 20s, I get it. I mean, I hear from her and her friends about how neither party of them makes them happy. And that's something that we need to also remember for those of us who identify as Republican or Democrat, that we need those voters in order to win. If every Republican in North Carolina voted for the Republican candidate, we would still lose if we do not have the unaffiliated voters. Can you talk a little bit about what the parties need to look at when we are talking to those people who will basically decide who our presidential candidate will be for North Carolina, and also who our governor will be in 2024? What do parties need to do to talk to those folks?
Yeah, absolutely. You touch on a very important point, and your daughter is a great example of that. The voters that don't necessarily feel that same sort of partisan identity have a tendency to support candidates based on what I call the two I's, image or an issue. Mm-hmm. And they will gravitate towards a particular candidate that they like, that has a good story to tell and a powerful message and is an effective campaigner, the sorts of image-related things that people identify with candidacy. The issues, sometimes it's about a specific set, or singularly or in combination with other types of issues. We've seen in North Carolina, and there in Iredell County, issues like the toll road on I-77. That became a really significant issue for voters in one particular election that probably weighed more heavily on the choice those voters made than any other factor, including party. And so sometimes those are the factors that we need to look at. For Republican candidates running in 2024, I think what I've seen in the polling so far is to be successful, to win, particularly in these statewide races, it's critical that constituency of unaffiliated and, relatively speaking, somewhat conservative. Now, we've talked about partisan identity, but coupled with that is an ideological identity. Do people characterize themselves or think of themselves as being either liberal or conservative or moderate? And there is a cohort within this universe of unaffiliated registered voters of people that would say of themselves they feel as though they are somewhat conservative. They don't have necessarily strong feelings about key issues like gun rights or abortion or public school funding, those sorts of things. But they are up for grabs. And Republican candidates with the right message, talking about the right issues, and projecting that right image can win over those somewhat conservative, unaffiliated voters. And because North Carolina is so competitive overall on a statewide basis, winning over that percentage of unaffiliated, somewhat conservative voters could make all the difference in an election for statewide office in 2024.
Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about, thank you for hitting on that, because that's something that really plagues at me a lot, is how do we talk to those folks? And I think what I heard from Morgan Jackson and from Paul Shoemaker is that it is going to be a very small sliver of the electorate that's going to choose our statewide candidates. And they've identified those as someone that I see every day in the mirror, someone who lives in suburban North Carolina, with college educated, with 2 children, and a dog and a cat. I mean, I'm just like vanilla. That's me. And so and then maybe I've just, outsized my influence because of, I listen to myself and see myself every day, but I also talk to my girlfriends, and there are things that there's very important to them, and it's issues, and a lot of them don't really care for the Republicans or Democrats. So this is something else that came out of that lunch that almost just made me nauseous. just to even think about it, the way that these two strategists say that we're going to get like people like my girlfriends and me to change our vote from one to the other is going to say hold your nose and vote. So what does that mean? That just means an onslaught of money coming in for negative advertising and negative campaigns, and it just is so offsetting to me or off-putting to me that this is the tactic that's going to happen. But it almost seems like it's just like this self-perpetual beast that we feed into all the time. Is we have to make the other guy look bad so that when you go and hold your nose and vote, then you'll vote for my guy, not that guy. And I just have a guttural rebuke of that. But it seems like that's where we're headed again.
Well, I think you're right. And I will say, all through my high school years, I worked at an ice cream store. And many times when people would come in, they would order vanilla and apologize as though they were embarrassed to have ordered vanilla. And I would say, listen, vanilla is a flavor. If there wasn't vanilla in the ice cream, it would just taste like frozen milk.
Right.
So don't be ashamed of vanilla. It's a flavor. It's absolutely a flavor.
That's funny. Well, I guess I'm vanilla.
But to your point, what much of the national polling and polling conducted in North Carolina shows that imagining that the matchup in 2024 in the presidential contest is Joe Biden against Donald Trump, in effect a rematch from 2020. What that segment of the voting population, you and your women friends, that cohort, that important group that's winnable by either side, they perceive that. Now, for whatever reason, this is just the analysis of public opinion. It's not my opinion. It's what the collective wisdom of likely voters is, that they view that matchup of Biden versus Trump as a choice of the lesser of two evils. People not feeling strongly necessarily in support of either candidate, a significant portion of the electorate saying they support Donald Trump because they so significantly dislike Joe Biden, and the opposite being a significant portion of people saying they support Joe Biden because they don't like Donald Trump. Now, if those end up being the two nominees for the party offering for president, it may influence how voters down ballot view the candidates of those two parties. Now, that having been said, in the realm of possibility, it's quite, you can imagine it's not Joe Biden, it's not Donald Trump, it's two other candidates. That might completely change that sense of not necessarily voting for one candidate because you're so entirely against the other candidate. Right. It might make it more like a conventional election where it really is the two candidates trying to win undecided voters on they themselves and what they stand for, and not so much the dismissal of their opponent. But it is true that politics has a tendency to be the examination of opposites, and to the extent we could make our politics better. I wish we could and have people only talk about themselves and where they stand. But, even the founding fathers that we consider to be a unifying voice about how they wanted this country to operate, they didn't generally like each other and said very derisive things about each other, too. So there's a long history of this in American politics.
Yeah, the muckraking continues. I do want to drill down on something because that's kind of my Pollyannish maybe idea that hasn't been snubbed out yet from this life of politics that we lead, and I really am hoping for this dark horse on both sides of the ticket. Somebody actually enjoy listening to. I may not enunciate his name correctly, but Vivek Ramaswamy. I love hearing what he has to say. I think he's got great ideas. I appreciate his, look into things on the Republican ticket. And I also met Governor DeSantis and listening to his list of accomplishments, what he's done in Florida. I mean, it just makes my conservative heart tingle to see a guy who actually doesn't just talk about it, but actually does it. Kind of try to, in the last little few minutes that we have together, talk to me about that Republican presidential primary for North Carolinians, and what is the conventional wisdom or polling saying now about those two candidates, which is DeSantis and Trump?
Yeah, nationally and in North Carolina, the polling still shows Donald Trump with a pretty considerable competitive advantage among very likely Republican primary voters. Governor DeSantis came out of the box with pretty good numbers, at least initially, has not necessarily been able to have the surge to become a really what you would call a real contender to Donald Trump. I think the conventional wisdom at this point would be all things remaining constant. It seems very likely that Donald Trump would be the nominee if he continues through the Republican primary process. Now, that having been said, it's important to remember that Joe Biden really did not have a lock on the Democratic nomination back in 2020 until the South Carolina primary when Representative James Clyburn really did propel Biden forward by a very public display of support. If that had not happened, Bernie Sanders, in all likelihood, would have been the Democratic nominee.
Right.
And so the primary process in America for a president, as flawed as it may be, moving around from state to state and such, there may be some things that happen in the early voting states like New Hampshire and Iowa and South Carolina and Nevada, places. Things could happen. Something could really change the dynamic of that DeSantis-Trump rivalry at this point. Maybe one of the other candidates, Nikki Haley or even Tim Scott, maybe they take off and suddenly it becomes a far more competitive horse race type of phenomena. But right now, I think, and it seems, and I just saw some national polling, that a number of very likely Republican primary voters have said that they feel more strongly in their support for Donald Trump because they feel he's aligned with them on issues. They're not looking at, relatively speaking, whether or not he would seemingly be the best opponent to challenge Joe Biden as a probable nominee for president in the fall of next year. And so that sense of a base of Republican voters really still sticking with Donald Trump makes him, for all intents and purposes, the front runner at this point. But some things could happen in the not too distant future, and some of the legal troubles that the former president's having may be contributing to that. But at this point, if there is any other Republican that's likely to present a challenge to Donald Trump, I think it is Governor DeSantis.
Yeah, agreed. And I think what I'm hearing, and something that I will vocalize in some of the assessments that you're talking about is, when we choose our party nominee, Republican or Democrat, that's great. But we need to win in November. You have to win in November. And I heard from Morgan Jackson, the Democratic strategist, that the Democrats are quietly praying that it is a Trump-Robinson ticket because they feel like at that point, then they can create the demons or the evil or the nasty Republican narrative and basically sweep us in 2024. And when he said that, it landed, and it landed really well with me because, I kind of fear those same things. And I want to see a Republican governor, and I want to see a Republican president. And some of the polling that we're looking at right now, it just looks like if that's what we continue to do, then we may not be able to correct courses. Now that was my, obviously I'm a Republican, and that's my pitch. But do Democrats share that same fear with Biden, or have you heard anything from that camp that if Biden is their nominee, that they're worried that they cannot pull it through?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think some part of it, of course, anytime you have a presidential incumbent, the party is very interested in that person being the strongest possible candidate. You don't want your party's candidate for president to be a drag on the rest of the ballot. And it's interesting. The national polling has historically, going back since the start of the Biden administration, from that standpoint of history, still an increasing number of these unaffiliated, independent-minded voters across the country saying they are concerned about a second Biden term because of his age. Mm-hmm. And that's a very hard issue to overcome. Presidential popularity waxes and wanes. George Bush in the months immediately following 9/11 had 90% approval ratings. And then by the time he left office in 2008, it was down to 20-some%. So it does wax and wane as far as that goes. But in terms of an issue, your age is not the kind of thing you can do much to change. I mean, you're kind of stuck with your birthday, as my father used to say. So I think that the undertone in this election is, are Democratic voters enthusiastic about Joe Biden being their nominee, knowing that a significant portion of those critical, undecided swing voters have some expressed concerns about the president's ability based on his age? And the other part of that is, I don't know if Biden was to announce that he's decided not to seek a second term. I don't think there's necessarily a consensus candidate for the Democrats to put forward. Kamala Harris, the vice president, would be the logical person, but I don't think there's unanimity among key Democratic leaders that she would be the best candidate to lead the ticket. And beyond that, there's not really a significant nationally known Democrat who could step into that role and serve to unify the Democratic Party in the 2024 elections. I think that's part of the challenge. And Gavin Newsom, the current governor of California, may be as close as they have as to what you might consider a dark horse candidate that could emerge. But even that, I'm not sure how much of a difference that would make.
Yeah. Well, Joe Stewart, thank you so much for being a part of the show and, as always, imparting your wisdom and knowledge with us. And I just appreciate you making the time with us to be here today. Thank you so much.
Senator, always glad to be on the show.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We'll be right back after the break. Thanks for listening to We're Just Saying.
near 86. For tonight, mostly clear, a low around 60. Then sunshine tomorrow, high of 84. Mike Jackson, WSIC News.
Welcome back, everyone, to We're Just Saying. If you want to be a part of the show, you're welcome to call in at 704-873-1400. Someone's already beat you to the punch, though, I believe. We have a caller on hold. I want to say thank you so much for calling in. You're on with Vickie Sawyer.
Hello, Vicki. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for calling in.
Well, you're welcome. Back in the wintertime, my name is Jim, and I live in Statesville, and I work for the county.
Okay.
But back in the wintertime, before Josh Stein threw his hat in there for governor, I heard something on the news that he sued somebody, I don't know if it was the Board of Elections or what, and he won, to be able to lie about his opponents and not get sued or anything. Is that true? Or
yeah,
expand on that. I just remember hearing it back in the wintertime.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. And I'll try to remember or recall as best as I can. So he was on the ballot last time around for Attorney General. There was an attorney out of Winston-Salem named Jim O'Neill who was on the Republican candidate. In that point in time, the Republicans almost swept in every one of the Council of Governors races except for Governor and Attorney General Josh Stein. So by all accounts, Jim O'Neill should have won, except for there was a really damning piece of TV commercial that came out, and it accused Jim O'Neill for being the one who was responsible for backlog of rape kits. So at the time, we had all of these rape kits that were being collected after the crime, and the state lab was not getting the results out in time. And so, yes, sir. So you're exactly right. So Jim O'Neill had nothing to do with that, right? He's just a district attorney out of Forsyth County. He has nothing to do with how quickly the state lab actually does those sorts of things. Actually, that would be under the governor's purview, and Attorney General Josh Stein himself would have more of a say in that than Jim O'Neill. So based on that, Jim O'Neill sued, and then a Wake County district attorney currently actually would agree to hear that lawsuit. Now, I'm missing some things in there, I'm sure, but I knew that was a big coup in the Democratic Party because you shouldn't eat your own, because the Wake County DA, she was or is a Democrat. And so that suit did go to court. And what was said was that Josh Stein could completely lie in political ads, and that was a constitutional First Amendment thing. So, yes, sir, you're right. And it was just dirty politics, and it got it got backed up by our courts.
So, for the governor's race, he's going to be able to lie and get away with it?
I mean, I guess so. I think that's what you see in a lot of these political ads, and it's just disgusting to me. And in fact, probably one of the reasons why I don't even listen to them anymore, even though I have to participate in the system. I just, you're exactly right. Basically, as soon as you put your name on the ballot, you're free. I mean, you are free to get persecuted, called, cussed at, fussed at, lied about, and told anything you want. You have no I have no protections So as soon as you put your name on the ballot, you basically just you give over your name, image, and likeness to be mutilated in the public space, and you have no help. Which you've seen as far as Facebook or Twitter. I've got some nasty trolls.
All right. Well, thank you for explaining that.
Yes,
I have to get back to work.
Hey, thank you so much, and thank you for working for the county. I know that
I drive for.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you so much for working with us. I appreciate what you guys do, especially when I see things from other counties and it's not such great news. So thank you so much. Again,
you're welcome.
Yes, sir. Again, if you want to be a part of the show, you're welcome to call in at 704-873-1400. We do have another call on the line. Thank you so much for calling in. You're on with me, Vickie Sawyer.
Hi, Vic. It's Jesse.
Hey, Jesse.
I just want to say, keep your chin up, stick in there. You and Jeff both are doing awesome jobs.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much.
Your guest that you had on, I missed who it was, but y'all was talking about, what makes voters tick and what gets the votes in. Just thought I might share what makes me vote for who I vote for.
Please do.
And hopefully it'll help you.
Yes, sir.
And the first is as I listen to make sure where somebody's safe is. And I hope whenever I vote and who I vote for, when they go in there, and when they have to cast their votes toward laws and passing bills and stuff, I hope that they will first and foremost do what they say, and that's, when they claim that they are a child of Christ, is to go to the Bible for their answers. And stick with that. It's not so much going to the colleagues and getting their opinion and making their decisions on other people's opinions. It's just what does the Lord say about this? And that's the most thing that I look at. And I hope that helps you.
It does.
I think a lot of people are sick and tired of that political correctness. They're tired of the lies and deceit that's been going on in this country for decades. And I think if we've seen more of that, I think a lot of people out there that's like me would come out and vote more.
I agree. Yeah, good.
And again, thank you, and I hope everybody has a good Father's Day weekend.
Oh, that's right. You too. Thank you so much for calling in, Jesse. I always appreciate your perspective. Yeah. Thank you, sir. That is really something that weighs on me a lot and I look towards the political landscape for North Carolinians is what makes voters tick and what makes them come to the polls. And not just in Iredell County. I'm talking about Wake and Mecklenburg and those population centers that are increasingly getting more and more Democratic. And how do we as Republicans come in and try to tick away at that? We do have another caller on the line. Thank you so much for calling in. You're on with me, Vickie Sawyer.
Good morning, Vicki. William here.
Hey, William. Thanks for calling in again.
First go around with Ronald Reagan, I wasn't old enough, and I wanted to vote for that man so badly. Then I graduated from high school in 1984, and that fall I was able to vote for him. And I remember how proud I was when I voted. I felt like I was a big man going to the voting polls to vote. And I think people lose sight of the fact that they have that right. It's not a right, it's privilege, and the privilege has to be earned. And if a lot of people will get on that mindset that instead of walking around thinking they're entitled, we might be better off. And as far as the parties go, Republican, Democrat, or Independents, they've changed through the years. We all know that. The Democrat Party of today is nowhere near what the Democrat Party was back in the 60s or the 40s or the 50s or what have you.
That's right.
The Republican Party is same. I'm registered independent now. And I said to my wife before she passed away earlier this year that I was probably not going to vote for Donald Trump, simply on the fact that there's just so much distraction with that man. But then I've tried to listen to him. I've tried to give the benefit of the doubt. And in all actuality, Vicki, he's really the only man that we have right now that can weather that storm up there. And it is one kind of a storm in Washington, D.C. He's been there. And if we can get him back up there again, I think he'd be the only one to weather it. I just don't know if the other candidates, whether it be Democrat running against Biden or some of the Republican candidates that are running now, I just don't know if they can get up there in Washington, D.C. and weather that chaos that's going on, in my opinion. But
Understood.
Back to voting, it is a privilege. All of us have that privilege. And I remember my father saying to me, son, if you don't go vote, you do not have the privilege to complain.
That's right.
simple as that.
That's right.
It's as simple as that.
That's right.
So we just got to go to the voting booths. And I've changed my mind about Donald Trump, not saying that DeSantis or Nikki Haley or Tim Scott or any of the rest of them wouldn't be good candidates. But I just think Donald Trump is our man because sometimes, Vickie, we got to fight fire with fire. And I think Donald Trump is our fire.
Well said. Well, good. Well, William, thank you so much. Again, I'm sorry for your loss, but thank you so much for communicating that with me because it's good to hear. We do have another caller on the line, but if you would like to call into the show, the number is 704-873-1400. You're on with Senator Vickie Sawyer. Thank you so much for calling in.
Is this me?
Yes, sir. It's you.
Okay. I came to this state at age 18 in 1975 from Florida. And we were, at that time, the Hunt administration was strong, and Eastern North Carolina politics was very strong. But I also went to school the next year at Appalachian State. Room and board and tuition was $900 a semester or less. And I was able to even at minimum wage, come home and work a couple jobs in the summer and have $1,000 left over from all my expenses of going to school. And this is crazy how much it's costing us. The tax rate when we came here was 3%. We got to get back a hold of this, and we have to get back a hold of being able to let a man like me come and work hard in the summer and go to a school and not go into debt. And
I agree.
There's just something wrong with our politics here in this state right now.
I agree. I'm glad you mentioned about that, and thank you so much for calling in about that. Let's talk about tuition for a 4-year degree at a university system here. Be reminded that each and every building on the university campus is bought and paid for already, not with tuition, not with student fees, but with your and my tax dollar. So when you go and see those beautiful buildings at UNC Charlotte or Appalachian or Chapel Hill, NC State, they're bought and paid for out of the general fund from the General Assembly. Now, 52% of our $32 billion budget is gone or goes to and dedicated to the state budget. To education from the state budget. Now, a part of that 52% is the university system. That university system gobbles up about 14% of that. So we're talking about billions and billions of dollars going to the university system. And yet we're continually paying our children. Our children continually have to spend about $20,000 a year at a mid-level school to get an education from a 4-year degree. Now let's also talk about that. So say you're a kid who has to do it on your own. You get in there, and so you're $60,000 in debt. That's if they help you get out in 4 years, because remember, their incentive is not to help you get out in 4 years. In fact, only half of those students who enroll actually graduate within a 4-year time. They either drop out or they take 5 and 6 years to graduate. So let's go ahead and tack that up to $100,000 then, say that you're doing for a university. How are you as a 26-year-old kid, not a kid at 26, you're a grown person, but anyways, how are you at 26 years old with $100,000 in debt going to be able to A, afford a car so you can get back and forth to the work, and B, be able to buy a house or live in these astronomical prices for an apartment? It is predatory lending at its finest. It is absolutely putting the government's neck on a foot on the neck of these young people and just putting them in debt like crazy. Now, again, remember, a large majority of our money goes to fund education. I don't think that it is the General Assembly's fault. I really do see that the universities have become this monolithic, just money-hungry group that instead of worrying about product, worry about process. And they continue to even lower their admission standards so they can get more children in. We have a really good system for community colleges, and Mitchell Community College. I'm going to brag on them for a moment. They can absolutely give you a trade or a 2-year degree to transfer into one of those universities at a fraction of the cost. I just see so now, and this is me not having the data behind it, but just going out to dinner a lot in Raleigh with other people. If I see another 4-year degree student who has a degree in philosophy, not to pick on philosophy degrees, but a degree in philosophy who is waiting tables or bartending, I'm just going to like scream, because it just seems like we are educating these kids in a degree that does not equate to a discernible skill that's marketable in the marketplace. We have all of these people who need to have and hire and find people to work. And it just seems like we are misleading our youth down the wrong path. If you go to, and I hear from our transportation folks constantly, those people who build roads or build houses or they are electricians. They work with their hands and their minds. They are making double what some of these kids are making without having to go to a 4-year degree and not having any kind of student loan debt. They are double and tripling the salaries of those kids who are now graduating with a degree that's not marketable and $100,000 in debt. We have done something wrong, and we have to work on reducing first of all, the university system needs to start refining what kind of options that they give to these students. I mean, not every university in North Carolina needs to do everything. They need to specialize, reduce these programs, and figure out ways to cut costs, because in the end, it's our students that are the ones who are getting the raw end of the deal. And obviously, you guys can tell that just hits a nerve with me, because I just feel like it has become a predatory lending institution that hurts our kids more than anything else. So thank you so much for that. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Can I interject one thing?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were there. I apologize.
Some incentive for our high school students, if you're math, science, or whatever degree. The top 25% of all admissions to North Carolina schools of in-state residents go for free. And you talk about an incentive to go to class and get the top 10% or 25%. That's an incentive.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, sir. We do have now the North Carolina General Assembly about 5 or 6 years ago did issue a couple of things that were very beneficial. One was North Carolina College Promise. That means if you do go to a community college and take the general ed classes, then the university will have to take all of those classes as if you would have taken them there. So usually before that, you did your 2 years at a community college, you went to, say, Chapel Hill. Chapel Hill would say, oh, those courses really don't matter. You have to retake them. That is no longer the case. They have to give you those gen ed credits. Secondly, we have identified about, like I was saying, about 5 or 6 years ago, universities that were underutilized, and we gave a tuition break to those universities, students attending those universities. So the tuition's only $500 a year. I'm not going to remember all of them off the top of my head, but a few that I do know, Western Carolina being one of those, Fayetteville State being another. I think Elizabeth City University, which actually has a great pilot school. So if you have a child who loves aviation or doesn't even know if she likes or he likes aviation or not, there is a university that they can learn to be a commercial pilot, and it's a $500 tuition. I think that's fabulous. Those type of innovative, in Pembroke University, doing some amazing things, especially in healthcare. Those type of things are really innovative and good, and helps with getting folks the type of skills they need, not just to be a rail-wounded, debt-ridden person in society. So sorry for my rant, but I'm very passionate about that. Something also I'm very passionate about, and has been in the news this week, I think you heard from the intro, is that we are moving the bill to disallow biological men to play in women's sports. And it seems like, gosh, are we talking about this again and again? Well, yes, we are. I worked very hard with our house counterparts, and we now have included not only the K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade public schools, private schools, but also the universities. So this aligns with 22 other states. We did hear in committee when I was presenting the bill, well, what about Duke University, and why are you, the NCAA may, are allowing people who identify as women, and if they take testosterone blockers, and then it's just like all of these if and then and what. And meanwhile, we had the UNC Chapel Hill women's basketball coach for 30 years who had just an amazing lady who's won many titles. She got up in committee and said the most profound thing. She said, college women sports is about winning. That's one thing. I got to keep my job because I won national championships and conference championships. She said, I gave away 300 to 400 scholarships to young women who to play basketball for me. If you allow a biologically superior person, because they are biologically male, to come in and start winning, then I'm going to have to, as a coach, go out and recruit other transgender athletes. So therefore, women who've played their entire life for basketball and their goal is to be a UNC Tar Heel. I know some of you NC State fans are not a big, but so we can say NC State, whatever. But if you want to play Division I basketball for a top-ranked school as a female, you won't be able to. Your dream is gone, because it is just a fact that biological men, regardless of the hormone blockers or what you surgically do to yourself, just are stronger than women. Now in a joking way, I look at my male counterparts and I say, I bet you guys are really like chewing on your tongue when we talk about this, because it's the only time us women will admit that men are superior to us in anything. And I'm like, I'm sure you guys want to sit there and tell me this. Like, they're like, yes, we can't say it out loud, but we're finally glad that you guys admit that we're better at one thing than you are. And so, but it's been a very hard bill to talk about, because we do have people who come in and say that I am hateful, that I'm discriminatory, that I am transphobic, that I hate people. How could I? And it's not any of that at all. Guys, not to look at me now, but I used to be a really good athlete. My kids are athletes. I coached young women. I see how important it is for these girls to be on a team, to work together, and how productive of employees female athletes are when they get out into the workforce. Because what other training ground than you have than a sports team to teach you how to work with people for a common good and hopefully be successful? I do not want to deny that to a young woman. And so we have had that. Now the bill will go to the floor on Monday, or Tuesday next week, and I'll be presenting it on the floor. I'm really torn about how I'm going to present that bill, because it seems like everything's been said, but there are just some things that need to be put out there. So I'm working on my floor speech this week. We do have a few more minutes left in the show, so if you do want to be a part of it, 704-873-1400, feel free to call in. So that was one of the bills that we had worked through. There's a couple others I'm going to touch on. Something interesting to me that may not be interesting to most is the Civilian Traffic Investigators Bill. I know. Everybody just turned off the radio. But okay, so check it out. So I'm an insurance agent, and oftentimes we get people who are in accidents. That's who you call, your insurance agent. Well, the people who respond to that are our local municipal or city police force. Well, the police force has a lot of other things going on, like solving crimes and making sure that neighborhoods are safe, or working through, murders, hopefully not, but, those are the kind of things that they're having to deal with. When you and I get in a car accident because I was, not paying attention and the accident was my fault, maybe you don't want to divert their attention away from, making our community safer while settling a dispute between me and you about who was paying attention. So, and now on the governor's desk is a Civilian Traffic Investigators Bill. It is a pilot program that had already been worked out in Wilmington. They've been doing it for years. And so the city can actually hire independent contractors to respond to the traffic accident, and then they are the ones who will write the reports and be submitted to the insurance companies. So it's a really nice way in order to help local law enforcement take a little bit off of their plate and not have to deal with maybe more minor issues, and so that they can really focus their issue and attention on things like keeping our neighborhoods safe, which our local guys and sheriffs do really well. Our sheriff does really well now. So that one is an option. It's not that it has to be, but I thought it was kind of neat on the way it worked. Another thing that we are working out is say no woke investing. So there is a thing called ESG, which stands for environment, social governance. And that's a score, kind of like a company's credit score. So, like when you and I go get a loan and they tell us, oh, you're a really great credit score because you have done all of these things. Or, oh, you got a really bad credit score because you didn't do these things. Well, ESG, environment, social governance, is basically a score put on a company that is used by investors to say, hey, did you have enough wokeness? Do you have people, do you invest or do you work with, say, mining companies, or are you involved with Remington Firearms, or you involved with fossil fuel production? All of these things. And if you are if you're a company and you deal with those kind of things, or you are a company that does those things, then you are downgraded, and especially by large investors, and then that hurts your bottom line. So it's really corporate bullying. That's all it is. It's corporate bullying to make companies do things so that we as consumers only have choices that make it fit a very liberal narrative. So that is something that is a trend across America. You've heard this, things, especially on Fox News and some other areas about ESG. So we passed a bill this week to say that, look, when we're talking about state investments, when Dale Folwell, the treasurer, is doing investments, he cannot invest and work with any company that does a factor of ESG. That's just off the table. We're not getting into that game. We don't want to be a part of that game, and so move on. We also have a few other things going on, but budget timeline, I know budget, again, turn off the radio, right? But we do have things that we're working through, and for those of you in government, the budget is a big deal. We are still at an impasse, and it happens every year. The Senate in the House, they fight back and forth. You think we're all on the same team, we wear the same jersey, but we definitely play on different sides. One of us is offense, the other one of us is defense, and it just never knows who's going to break the line first. And so that's where we kind of are right now. Once that budget is done, then you will see us moving through. Remember, the Medicaid expansion is only allowed if the budget is passed. That's why there's probably a lot of stalemate on this, because there's going to be a lot of governor's broccoli for him to eat in this thing. And so you're going to see some stuff moving through. So this next month in the General Assembly is crucial. It's going to be fast. I'm not going to be able to be here a couple of weeks. I will try to get a good substitute in, but I do want to say thank you so much for listening today. Thank you for Joe Stewart for calling in and giving his sage advice on what's going to happen in the near future. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be with here, and thank you for letting me be your senator. Have a wonderful weekend, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Thank you.